Wow, welcome everyone. I'm hoping that you can all see this with me clearly and you can hear me. My name is Tina Mystery. I am a psychologist trained in the UK, and you have joined to be part of the Brown Therapist Network first live event, which is as part of South Asian Heritage Month. And we're talking about mental health and religion within the South Asian context. Joining me today is my co-host, Kino, and she's going
Hi,
to
everyone.
be sharing a slideshow, a little bit of a presentation, and you also got the opportunity to ask us any questions as we go through the discussion and the panel. Should we start off with the presentation and then we'll go to the panel discussion? So over to you, Kino.
Okay, just going to share my screen. And this will work in just a moment. Okay, so hello everyone. As Tina already said, we're going to be talking about religion, spirituality, and mental health in South Asians. So we're part of the Brown Therapist Network, and you may have seen us on Instagram. You might be a member on the platform, and what we are is that it's a global community of South Asian therapists and wellbeing professionals who collaborate with each other, that want to grow together, and that want to challenge Eurocentric mental health together, and want to see more of us in those therapeutic spaces instead of what we're used to seeing, which is the older white man stereotype. And this is just our mission. We want to decolonize mental health, and we want to grow and work together for global change. So South Asia is the birthplace of four of the world's religions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism. And there's also Islam, Judaism, lots of other religions within South Asia. And South Asians generally have gone to many other parts of the world. We've ended up on pretty much every continent that you can imagine, and even in the UK alone, there's millions of us, as you can see from the stats over here. And lots of us follow religions such as Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, Sikhism, Buddhism. And as you can see from these graphs, the majority of Pakistanis and Bangladeshis in the UK tend to be Muslim, and the majority of Indians in the UK tend to be either Hindu, Sikh, but there's also a number of Christians and Muslims too. So within the South Asian community, there tends to be a lack of uptake for psychological and therapeutic services. But this doesn't seem to be because there are less of us experiencing mental health conditions. As you can see from the graph on the right, we tend to have either a similar level or even higher in some cases levels of mental health disorders, but we seem to be seeking less therapeutic support, as you see on the left. However, lots of us do turn to religion and to religious leaders for support or for comfort in times of distress. And within South Asia, traditional healers tend to be the first line of treatment for people with mental health problems. And even today, in a time of science, empiricism, we still place an importance on some of our traditional rituals. I'm sure many of you can relate to having been given milk with turmeric, and that's helped cure a cold, for example. And even with some mental health conditions, we might pray, or we might do something more spiritual or Ayurvedic, for example, and it can actually help. So, why is religion and spirituality actually important to consider within mental health? So, lots of studies have actually shown that mental health intervention, sorry, that religious interventions can actually help depressive symptoms, for example, and it can help us recover from a mental health condition. And religion is a part of us; it's a part of our identity. So, if we're going to go into a therapeutic space, we want our whole identity to be addressed within that space in a culturally competent manner, or in a manner that our faith is really understood. But what do we actually know about what these religions say about mental health? What do we really know about the scriptures and what they say about mental health? And what did the religious leaders say about mental health? So, one of the religions or philosophies most associated with mental health may be Buddhism, because mindfulness has flourished in the West and it's become so popular. However, this has also been slightly criticized because it's been so far removed from Buddhism, and some people have said that it lacks the ethical and the aspirational qualities of the right form of mindfulness. Within Hinduism, Hindus tend to look to either superstitions or karma to understand why mental why mental illness might occur, and they believe that a confused state might be the cause of some types of mental pain. Within Islam, the Quran encourages people to seek mental health support when they might be struggling with some mental health issues, and it's stated that we should care for them in a humane way, and that it's the state's responsibility as well. Within the Guru Granth Sahib, within Sikhism, there are 4 factors that have been mentioned to potentially lead to depression, which includes excessive and unfulfilled sexual desire, anger, pride, and materialism. Within Christianity, there's descriptions in verses within the Bible that describes what depression might feel like, and it kind of humanizes those emotions and it words them within the Bible. And that's just a small taster. That's by no means what religion completely says about mental health, which is why we have our wonderful panel here with us. And anything that you want to know about the relationship between religion and spirituality, or perspectives, or like deeper perspectives on mental health, you can ask us here using the chat function. And we have our panel here. Oh,
Still on
sorry.
mute. There we go. I was on mute. Okay, so I'll introduce
I was trying to
me.
unshare the screen so I could see your face. Sorry.
Okay. I'll just introduce the panel then. So we've got a wonderfully diverse panel who we've invited with us, and we are so grateful to have their wisdom and knowledge with us today, because I think that it's great to bring all these people together to share their knowledge, and what a great opportunity this is for us to all learn from each other. Okay, so I'll welcome Amandeep Kaur. who is a certified holistic wellness coach at Core Coaching and a member of Seek Your Mind charity, which is based in the UK. Amandeep uses her personal experience with physical and emotional mental health challenges alongside her spiritual practice and formal training to provide professional and personal coaching and workshops. Amandeep is passionate about empowering people to take control of their physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being through a holistic approach. Some recent highlights have included working with elders in the Punjabi community during the pandemic, corporate workshops on habit change and meditation, a mindful parenting course, and more recently, a 10-week course on Sikhi and well-being with Seek Your Mind. We also have the wonderful Myra, who is an award-winning accredited counselor, supervisor, coach, counseling tutor, and founder of the Muslim Counselor and Psychotherapist Network, MCAPN. A Muslim ethnic minoritized practitioner, Myra represents a diversity within therapeutic professions, promoting counseling to ethnic, minoritized, Muslim, and underrepresented marginalized communities. Myra was awarded the Mental Health Hero Award in 2015. Do you want me to carry on, or shall I? Keen, or do you want to introduce the others?
Sorry, can you?
Shall I carry on? Yeah. Sorry, that's okay. We also have Ekta, who is in Canada. She is a social worker, private practice psychotherapist, and mindfulness trainer coach. She has 16 plus years of experience of working within the nonprofit space in clinical and program roles across India, the US, and Canada. Ekta is passionate about liberation from worldly systems, internal barriers, and any other oppressive components that keep us captive. Her personal practices span 10 plus years, with Vipassana and Tibetan Buddhist philosophy being at the core. She works with individuals, groups, non-profits, and corporations by providing curated content specific to their needs. Ekta says, my sessions are a combination of knowledge drawn from different faiths and philosophies and psychotherapeutic approaches, making them accessible to a diverse global audience. Welcome, Ekta. We also have Dr. Kavita Pulsod Seksaria, if I've said that right. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Kavita. She is a licensed clinical psychologist based in Maryland. She's earned her PsyD from Rutgers, where she wrote her dissertation on Hindu, Indian, American conceptions of mental health. She is the founder of Kavita is passionate about destigmatizing the seeking of professional help for mental illness and collaborating with religious communities in this initiative. And finally, we have Dr. Ria Patel, who is a psychologist and behavioral scientist who works in academia and public health, researching the intersectionality of religion, spiritual culture, and health. She is involved with several projects that explore the role of religion and spirituality in a wide range of conditions, for example, breast cancer, obesity, disordered eating, and domestic violence. She has an international reputation for her research into religion, spirituality, and health, and has just developed a taxonomy of religious practices that have been empirically tested within healthcare. Ria is passionate about delivering holistic healthcare and is a huge advocate for improving health inequalities among culturally and linguistically diverse populations. Welcome, panelists, welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us on this really special day, because for me, as a South Asian practitioner, psychologist, I don't think I've ever had this opportunity before to sit with so many different professionals with different backgrounds that want to talk about religion. Even within my training, this wasn't even a thing. So I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. So Keenal, I'll let you kick off with the first question. And please, people who are watching at home, please do drop your questions in the chat box. We will share them with our panelists.
Yeah, please do. And the first question for all of you, whoever wants to go first, is how does your faith view mental health? Anyone can take it. Myra, do you want to start?
I was about to say that I think everyone's far too polite to want to jump in. So again, perhaps, an interesting trait and reflection of our cultures and our identities. So I think there's something about the evening itself, I think, is reflective of how we have assimilated and internalized our cultures and how we operate in the world. And I think that's partly actually what we're talking about this evening anyway, which is what we then internalize, then how does it show up and how do we then show up in the world? And of course, then it happens in kind of in groups and when we're speaking with other people. So kind of just wanted to note that first of all. So yeah, the question about how does, so in my case, how does my faith view mental health? I think that was a beautiful slide earlier there in the presentation. Because interestingly, there is something about, for me, what really stood out for me in the surah that you quoted in your presentation, Keenal, is for me, it really emphasized the community aspect of it. Yeah. And for me, it tugs on my heart emotionally when I see that, because for me, there is something about, I think there is something about the drive of the work that we all do. I'm on a panel here with such amazing people, and Tina, as you're reading out everybody's impressive portfolios, I go back to this theme about we're all doing work in our communities. We're all doing work that is about supporting people in our own communities. And so for me, whenever I think about mental health and we then put it in the context of our faith, religion, spirituality, there is something around the compassion we show for people that are suffering and struggling. And so it doesn't talk about putting to one side, dismissing, rejecting, abandoning people that are struggling with their mental health. It's the complete opposite. It's about embracing, taking in, nurturing, looking after those people. And of course, we're all on the mental health spectrum. So how can we possibly distinguish between people then who suffer from mental health and therefore we just ignore them and abandon them, when actually, when we take up this kind of ethos and this motto around community and that we look after each other, I think for me, that's really at the heart of viewing mental health as something that is actually shared, something that is common between all of us, rather than those that have it and those that don't, or those that struggle with bad mental health versus those that have good mental health. So for me, there is something about it immediately equalizes the playing field for every single person in our communities. And for me, I think that's the beauty of the moment we position mental health. For me, actually, in any spiritual faith or belief system, is that I think what absolutely stands at the forefront is the humanity and the compassion. And I get quite emotional about it, because I think for me, that gets so removed and stripped away from the training and from the experiences that we get. And I think actually the work that each of us are doing, what we're actually doing is putting the humanity back into it. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from today.
That's really beautiful, I think.
Ekta? Thank you for sharing that, Myra. And just to add to what Myra was saying, when you asked me, the thing that stumped me was, what does your faith say about mental health? I grew up in a Hindu Jain family. I went to a Christian school, which was incredibly cosmopolitan. I'm married to a Christian and I practice in the Buddhist faith. So I was like, oh my God, where am I supposed to talk from? So that's something that I just wanted to throw out there. So I will share a personal example of what my faith says, my practice says, and how it freed me. Having undergone a very traumatic childhood, adolescence, I was a caregiver to my mother at 13 who had young onset Alzheimer's, and I was a primary caregiver for several years. I was 18 when she died. I have to say that I lived with depression, anxiety, complex PTSD, and I always thought that these were things that I had to fix, that there was something inherently wrong with me. And I remember the first day that I sat in a Vipassana retreat way back in 2007, and I heard S.N. Goenka saying that the first noble truth is that there is suffering in this world. And within seconds, I just felt all the shame and guilt wash over me. Like, it just left my body, because I realized that there was not something inherently wrong with me. There is inherently things going on with everybody. So that's the shared experience that Myra was talking about. And it's such a moment in my head that I can see it as clearly today as it was on that day. And I have seen it time and again when I share this in my practice with clients, that no matter how good we are, no matter how much we take care, no matter how many good deeds you do, how much you help others, suffering, difficulties, challenges are going to be a part of life. And that I find that also helps clients almost calm down, because all of us have this guilt and shame around mental health, right? And so that's just something I wanted to throw out there as a personal example. Compassion based, ethical living, all of these are means of not just fixing ourselves but liberating ourselves from them. So they are going to keep coming our way, but we are going to learn ways in which we can rise above them, and community is an incredibly important aspect of it. In the West, what tends to happen is that it's mental health is looked at something that needs to be fixed one on one. It's between you and your clinician, you and your doctor, and I find that can be very isolating. So when we bring in the community aspect, if you talk about loving kindness meditation, just like me meditations, which are tools with which make people realize that even though my suffering and your suffering is not the same, we are united in the experience of suffering. And that community aspect can really bring the temperature down in terms of addressing one's personal challenges.
Just to kind of piggyback on the back of what Ekta was saying, again, honing in on the fact that it's what your faith says. I think Ekta raised some really interesting points about kind of, it's firstly how your faith perceives mental health, but it's also how the individual perceives mental health. And then it's also the wider community and how they perceive mental health. So instantly there's so many different interactions going on there. So from my perspective as a Christian, my faith would tell me, and kind of put in my practitioner hat aside, that God is with me. So irrespective of what is going on in this life, I am not alone. I may feel like I'm alone. I may feel like nobody understands, nobody gets it. But my faith tells me that whatever is, I guess, written for me in this life, God has already gone before me, and so I don't need to be afraid. But in a clinical context, how do you conceptualize that? How do you provide patients with resources? And who is God? How do we bring him into therapy? I think that in itself represents a bigger challenge in Western psychology, but actually it's pretty simple. Faith is a very integral part of people's lives. We attend places of worship, we meditate, we read our holy texts, we try to apply our what we read in scriptures to our everyday lives. And I think, unfortunately, in our respective healthcare systems, religion is kind of seen as this black box that, you don't touch it, you don't go near it, and you don't address it. And actually, for a lot of people, not for everybody, it can be a very big solution for addressing mental health problems. And I think there's also an aspect of communities don't necessarily know how to handle certain mental health conditions, because there is still a very much a stigma. You know, when we think about chronic conditions, they're widely accepted as there's something, you know, it's behavior related, it could be genetic, something has happened, it's not seen as a punishment from God. But mental health conditions, in a lot of faith groups, it's very much like, well, what sin is in your life? You know, what wrongs have you done that have then caused a higher power or a deity to punish you? And I think those are the kind of perceptions that then prevent, and they're culturally entrenched perceptions. They're not entrenched in the Holy Scriptures with our respective religions. They are the things that kind of stop us from accessing appropriate health, us accessing resources that can support us. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic. But yeah, I don't think any of our respective faiths say that mental illness is a bad thing and it's not going to happen, because as Hector quite eloquently put, long suffering is a part of life. You know, challenges are going to come. It's just how we have compassion and remember that, you know, we are only human and there's only so much we can do in our strength.
Yeah, I think that was, everyone has spoken so beautifully and eloquently about this. You know, I think in one sense what Hinduism would say mental illnesses is any perception that separates our soul from God, right? Because so much of Hinduism is just trying to understand that we are divine, that our souls are divine, and that everything that stops us from knowing that is mental illness, or is an illusion or Maya. And so I think when we think about things in that way, it can be really overwhelming and really scary and hard to understand what to do with that. Or it can be really empowering, like so much of everything in Hinduism and in faith and in general, right? In understanding what we can do with how we understand things. So, of course, there will be the sense that, okay, if you're really struggling, then it means it's because you're not strong enough, because you need to spend more time meditating or praying, or just somehow working on this notion of disciplining and stilling your mind from how it runs. But also there's this idea at the same time that we can use faith to see that struggling is inevitable, that it's human, that it's something we all do. Whether it's, characters in the Ramayana, Mahabharata, particularly in Hinduism, or what we're all dealing with today. So, I think it can be very empowering to think of mental health this way, but it takes work and it takes engagement to help people see that, and to help people see the opportunity for resilience and strength within them.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm really humbled to be amongst such amazing beings, first of all. And again, even, it's amazing that everything that everyone has said, right, we can all relate to, no matter what path we've chosen to follow. And I thank Ria as well for bringing up the G word, because that's become that thing that we don't want to bring up, God, right? So I would echo everything. Community is really important, but also what Dr. Kavita was saying. That separation from God is, as I understand it, and there's as many understandings of as many religions as there are people in the world, but that causes a lot of that suffering is not understanding our true nature, not understanding ourselves. For me, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, one of the main topics of it is understanding what the mind actually is. There's so many different aspects of it, and I'm sure that's echoed in the other ways of life that we've got here, which is just understanding, what is causing this suffering, what is that separation, what is that hole that we feel like we have within us, and how do we fill it up. So just really connecting to that message that, yes, some people might see it as punishment, some people might see it as the evil eye, or all of these other kind of cultural things, but really this is about empowering yourself and truly understanding yourself, your mind, your body, your soul, whatever it is that you believe, and understanding that on a fundamental level, and not using it as an excuse for saying, this is just my karma and I'm being punished, but to take responsibility in your own life and say, okay, what is it that is not working in my life right now? And empower yourself to actually see what can help you. Some of you mentioned, some of those things that we can use, the community, the scriptures, delving into them, meditation, and using all of those different methods that, whether you say they've come from God, whether you say they've come from enlightened beings, it is using those forms because they've been given to us for us to overcome that suffering. Thanks.
I just want to add one last thing about community. I said it. So, and a lot of the comments on the side are saying that, but the community stigmatizes mental health. Like, we don't want to seek help, or it is then put on the individual that you're not good enough, you're not working hard enough, all of these things. So I just want to say that community doesn't always mean faith-based community or the people in your immediate community. I would say that connecting with faith-based community organizations to find like-minded individuals, because that's what helped me. Because yes, Ria is absolutely right. Like, in the Christian context, it happens. Even though I mean, my husband's Christian, we go to church, we are part of small groups. And if you take queer issues, whether you take mental health issues, whether you take feminist issues, domestic violence issues, we always come head to head with the misinterpretation and the illusions created around the scriptures, right? So my recommendation is that community is also created. It doesn't mean our immediate environment, the people we know. It means that starting to create people that understand us, accept us, and empower us. And we do the same for that. And in Buddhism, Sangha is very important. It's people traveling on the same path together. And it's one of the three main components: Dharma, the Buddha, the ascended ancestors, and Sangha, which is community. But just want to emphasize that it doesn't mean your family and your extended family and your neighbors. That's not what it means. It means people that uplift you.
Those were really powerful comments, weren't they, Kino? I was just amazed, really, really amazed. Thank you, everyone, so far.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to just have a look at a couple of the questions that have come through.
Yeah.
Have you
can bring them up on the screen if you
That would be good.
That makes it easier.
Yeah, there was one, I think, earlier on. I think we missed that. Could you be able to pull, I think it was Amina's question?
Oh, yeah, from Adiba, yeah.
Adiba, sorry. Apologies, Adiba. Your question was quite interesting, so if we can just get that up so I can read it. So why do you think there is still so much stigma attached to mental health issues in the South Asian community, whereas other communities have progressed, particularly looking at the Muslim community? Myra, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. So I think along with that question, I'm kind of monitoring the chat as well. And I think that other people have commented about stigma as well. And I was just kind of jotting down some notes as I was thinking about that, about the issue of stigma itself. And I think there are I'll go with three. There are three different tabs open in my head at the same time. So I've got three different streams of thought. One is, why is there stigma? And I think there's a whole lot of stuff around this. If we think about the stigma itself first. Now, stigma arises out of something that is not understood, where there is a lack of education around it. It is because it's not understood because because the stigma is about a topic or an issue that it itself is not seen, can't easily be identified, can't easily be fixed. And so I think stigma arises not just with mental health, but anything that actually is not understood, that isn't easily explained, that isn't easily seen, and it's not very tangible. So I think absolutely there is still stigma attached to mental health, born out of then this lack of understanding, lack of education around it. Kind of attached to that then, I think stigma then is compounded by how mental health is then understood itself. So there's my first tab in my head is there's stigma because of misunderstanding, miseducation, or lack of education, because it's about a topic itself that's not seen or understood very well. But then mental health itself then, I think, gets contextualized and positioned as something negative. And it's positioned and understood and contextualized in relationship to the individual itself. So mental health itself then can often be seen when we think about the stigma, but when we think about mental health itself within the South Asian communities, it is seen as a reflection of the individual, a reflection of that person's state of their soul or their heart or their sense of self or identity. Things like a couple of people have mentioned it already this evening. Somebody suffering from mental health because it's a punishment. Somebody suffering from mental health because they have sinned. Somebody is suffering from mental health because it shows or reflects their lack of faith or a weakness of faith. So you have both stigma that's compounding the issue, and then the issue compounds the stigma. And then we're in this really vicious cycle of the stigma and the mental health itself then really reinforcing the negativity around both. So I think that's why so often the stigma around mental health in particular, I think is quite difficult to shift. And interestingly, when we think about, if we take that example then of, well, mental health is a reflection of somebody, their lack of faith, their weakness, a lack of them being, it's a reflection of them being punished, it's a reflection of them sinning or being a bad person. Would we say that to somebody that had broken their leg? Would we say that to somebody who's walking around in crutches? Would we say that to, the Olympics is on right now. Do we say that to all the athletes that are pulling up with hamstring injuries and with breaking legs and having an injury? Of course we're not. So the moment we put physical injury in the same context as the stigma we attach to mental health, we start to see actually just how ridiculous it is. Why on earth can we attach negativity to mental health as a reflection of an individual when we would never say to somebody, that person suffering from cancer, that person has breast cancer or lung cancer, oh, it's because they've sinned or they're a bad person or because they have weak faith. I would hope never in a million years anybody here would ever think that. But there is something about with mental health, it gets positioned and contextualized as a reflection of the individual. And I think that just absolutely compounds the stigma that we then face within our South Asian communities. The third tab in my head, let me quickly mention it, is I think the other reason why stigma is still very much attached to mental health is because we end up trying to battle the stigma itself rather than the underlying root of it or the cause of it, which is the lack of education. My big push with the work that I do, with the work of MCAPN, well, one of the aims of MCAPN is to normalise, in inverted commas there, conversations about the very issues that people come to counselling with. With the MCAPN, I made a very intentional point that whilst we do mental health awareness, what we aim to do, one of the main aims in the network is actually to address and talk about the actual issues that people come to counselling for and to therapy for. Because if we only ever address the stigma, we never actually get people to understand what the issues are themselves. So I want to turn up and speak about what we call common presenting problems. What is anxiety? What is depression? People have marriage or relationship issues. Let's talk about sexuality. Let's talk about gender diversity. Let's talk about porn and sex addiction. Let's talk about all of the issues, narcissism, abuse, domestic violence. It's when we start talking about the issues themselves, the stigma starts to disappear. And something that I've seen, I've been working with clients now, I think I'm in my 12th year of working with clients. There has never been an issue itself of people from our communities actually coming forward and asking for help. To this day, I'm inundated, I do not see that there is a lack of people actually trying to get help for counselling, trying to access help via counselling or therapy. So the irony actually is that I think there is stigma, but the stigma no longer belongs with the issues themselves. I think the stigma is attached to the label of mental health, because in my day-to-day work, people from our communities are acknowledging where they are struggling in life and they are coming for help. So I think it's time for us to really address the fact that actually we cannot deal with the stigma if we're not talking about the actual issues that are causing it. And I think it's far more impactful that we talk about the issues themselves rather than just addressing the stigma. We will inadvertently address the stigma by the very fact we're talking about the issues.
If I can jump in as well, I think just to build on everything Myra's been saying, I'm coming particularly from a perspective of being a South Asian American, right? And growing up as a minority in a Western country. And so I think that one of the biggest sources of stigma in seeking mental health here comes from that sense that we're people who have come to this country and have a lot to prove and carry that every day. Maybe my parents certainly have more than I have, being the first ones to emigrate. And they've really internalized the sense that it's really important to be strong, and that anything that takes away from that is terrifying, and will maybe in some way show that they're not going to make it, right? So I think that's important, because it's really probably very different from how stigma operates in South Asia itself, right? And I think the other pieces of that are, like Myra's been saying, are the lack of education and the lack of understanding of what mental health is, what therapy is. And I think genuinely this comes because, at least, in the States, the way that psychology is practiced is colonized in a lot of ways. It is problematic in ways. It is not therapeutic in ways, right? So of course there are these misconceptions and there are these misunderstandings. Like Ria said, there's for so long just been the sense that if you talk about faith or spirituality in therapy, then it's not scientific, or it's not, evidence-based, or it's not going to be proven to work. And all of these things are problematic, right? And so I think it makes a lot of sense that some of the members of our community are like, why would I go to this white person to tell me that I'm too enmeshed with my family and that all I need to feel better is to draw boundaries, while paying all of this money and adhering to their ideas of scheduling and punctuality. Why would I have any sense that would work, right? But of course, increasingly, people are learning what therapy can be, that it doesn't have to be a place where you're feeling like your culture is subtly minimized or dismissed, or that you're not feeling understood, or that the relationships you have with God are seen as a source of strength and resilience, even in a therapeutic space. And so, I think it's really important to continue the work of showing people what all of us practicing therapy looks like and what it can be. And, yes, people are willing sometimes to reach out for help. And when they do, they really deserve a great experience, which I think we can provide by continuously pushing back on the misconceptions, but also the field itself and the ways it can be limited.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much, Kavita, for that. Shall we go to the next question, Keenal? Okay, Keenal, you're on mute, by the way. I can just see your mouth moving. Bless you. Okay,
sorry about that.
That's all right. So we've got a question from Dr. Jan Shah B.
Yeah.
I appreciate each religion encourages a compassionate and community ethos regarding mental health, but how can you support clients to feel empowered to challenge unhelpful community attitudes towards mental health? Who would like to take that? Anyone, someone. Go for it.
And I think this kind of relates a little bit to what Myra was saying as well. I almost feel like the emphasis on this question is not where I would like it to be, because I don't necessarily feel like it's the client's responsibility to challenge the unhelpful community attitudes. Again, the community needs to challenge the unhelpful community attitudes, and in the lovely way that Myra, eloquent way that she put it as well, which is it's by doing the work as well. It's by creating that space where you're not just focusing on the problem. I'm a coach, so it's about, solution focused for me. It's like, we can sit here and talk all we like about what the problem is, but is that going to help you in the long run? So by us as practitioners, by, maybe when those clients get to that stage, where they've kind of got to the next stage of their journey, it might be that they give back, and that's what I see happening all the time, is once they've got to that place where they can give back out, they will give back out. But it depends where you are. If you're in that vulnerable stage where you're requiring the help yourself, where your glass is empty, you're not going to be able to use that energy to then go out and challenge what the community aspects are. And often that becomes a part of the problem, because you're almost firefighting. You're too busy fighting all of these attitudes that are negatively impacting you, that you don't have the energy and the resources to be focusing on what it is that you need. So that's just kind of my perspective there, but I'm sure others can add to that.
Does anyone want to add anything to that, or should we move on to the next?
Can I just add? I kind of completely want to agree with what you've just said. I'm also really struck by the question as well, because it talks about how can we support clients to feel empowered. And again, I'm really struck by that dynamic of us being able to empower somebody else immediately sets up an oppressive relationship with clients that puts them in a position of powerlessness, and somehow we as practitioners, or any clinician, empowers a client for them to be able to go and kind of be an activist in the community. So again, I think just as important as it is for us to acknowledge the relationship our clients or any individual has within their community, I think we also have to be really mindful then of the dynamic we as practitioners then are also setting up with our clients, because are we then unconsciously repeating, reflecting the potential same powerlessness that they experience in their communities as well? So there's something around, again, that that metaphor, that idea about what we end up trying to do is kind of firefighting something, when actually it's a fire that's never going to go out by trying to put the fire out. We realise that the fire is being fed by a gas leak. Let's go fix the gas leak. And there's something about, we need to really get to the root of it, rather than trying to firefight the stigma that all we're going to do is keep hitting a brick wall with it. So I just think it's so important for us to recognise, as practitioners within a practitioner community, but also within the communities that we serve and come from, what are the dynamics that we might be helpfully setting up then for, as you've just said, for the clients to do the work, and it's not for the clients to be doing that work. The client's work is to help themselves and to focus on themselves.
And the last thing I'll add to that is that if the client wants to challenge these attitudes, if, like, absolutely both of you are correct, that does the client really want to do this? But if the client wants to do this, I think that approaches using storytelling, art, narrative therapy, comedy, all of these are great ways in terms of telling one's story. I think that instead of telling people they are wrong, sharing personal narratives has gone a long way. I can tell this from my own experience. I grew up in India in the 90s. When my mother had Alzheimer's, she was like a guinea pig. Doctors wanted to experiment on her, got every diagnosis in the book. And while there was a lot of stigma attached, I was so tired of it as a teenager. I started talking openly about it. And people used to call me, people used to email me, people used to stop me on the street or in the school and talk to me about the issues in their family's life. So I have found personally that speaking from using art, using photography, using narrative storytelling is a great way to, and people are doing it through dancing, through fashion. All of it is happening, and I am super excited for where we are. It doesn't have to be advocacy, doesn't have to be boring, it doesn't have to be challenging, it has to be expansive. It's about bringing people along with us, bringing them into the challenge zone, out of their comfort zone, into the challenge zone where we can all feel together, cry together, weep together, apologize to each other, and then move forward.
My heart's brimming because of that sort of, language you use, using creativity in our therapeutic spaces, but even with our kind of communal spaces, I think it's so important. So thank you so much for bringing that, Ekta. I really feel very connected to that idea. Should we move on to another question, Kino?
Yeah, so before our next question, Kulpreet Singh has just said that he's really appreciative of all of you sharing your insights, and he's watching from Vancouver, BC. And the next question is from Muna Bilgrami. So, how do you all think that shame associated with mental health issues can be reduced or overcome? If anyone wants to take that. Ekta?
Yeah, so first of all, shame is something that is very isolating. So there are many practices that are now named into psychology by using terms like self, giving it words instead of just saying this is shame. Where do I feel it? What does the sensation feel like? What color is it? What temperature is it? And to just allow the client to be themselves as we witness and they witness themselves is a great way of showing them or allowing them to experience the passing of the emotion and the state and the feeling as it is, because no feeling can be present within us 24/7. It changes and shifts, and it's not just shame. We allow them to experience emotions in their body. It's also joy, it's also beauty, it's also other things. Getting them to befriend how they experience emotions is a great way to normalize that, oh, shame is one part of it. The last thing I'll say about shame is shame and anger and guilt are some of those emotions we don't want to feel, but are often self correcting in nature. If we allow ourselves to feel them, we are going to be able to bring about a change that's going to help us, so the when you don't want to feel something, you either shut down, you distract, you numb. But when you go about feeling it, you expand, and then you're like, okay, now that I know what this is, what can I do about it, and how can I move forward with this? What have I learned from this?
Does anyone have anything to add on to that? Well,
Yeah, again, two tabs open in my head. One is I read a really amazing book recently that was all about I think it's called something like Healing the Shame Within. And it describes and positions shame or how it understands shame as an experience of being dissociated from self, which I think, Hector, you're talking about, rejoining, reattaching, reconnecting with yourself. And it's really powerful when we think about shame as being as an experience of being dissociated from ourselves, and it's born out of childhood experiences when a parent, most likely your primary caregiver or your mum, doesn't see you. And what I mean by that is you go to somebody explaining an upset or a hurt, or as a child something that you're experiencing as emotional distress, and it gets dismissed. That your tears, that your cries, that your upset gets dismissed, minimized, brushed away. And what that does sets up shame with you inside of yourself, because what you then carry within you is the message that part of you, that part of your feeling or experience isn't valued, is not worthy, is bad, and your parent, your mother or primary caregiver then doesn't value enough to see it, and it gets ignored, and so it gets what we call kind of split off internally. So if shame is born out of dissociating from the bad parts of ourselves, shame then associated with mental health is the shame associated with a part of us that we see as bad, a part of us that we see as it's a bad, evil, punishing, sinful, negative aspect of ourselves that we literally don't want to associate with, and has been, and that we have dissociated from it. So in order to remove the shame, we have to then, of course, then do the opposite of what shaming does to our mental health, which is to reconnect to it, is to associate with it, is essentially we have to learn to see ourselves. There is a need within us to see that part of us and to embrace it, bring it back into the fold, accept it as a part of us, no longer splitting it off, no longer minimizing it or dismissing it or rejecting that part of us, but to go, actually, do you know what? My sadness, my pain, my hurt, my upset is a part of my diverse experience in this world. It's a feeling that, again, if we put it in a faith or spiritual context, these are feelings that we have been blessed to experience as humans, that as a human race, we are all blessed with that huge diversity and breadth and richness of lived experience and emotions and feelings. The moment we start actually dismissing, rejecting, dissociating from those parts of our mental health or our feelings or our emotions, and we start shaming them, what we're actually doing is rejecting parts of ourselves that have been blessed and bestowed upon us. So in that first tab in my head, I'm going, so it's counterintuitive, it might feel really counterintuitive, but it's to embrace it, is to accept it, is to see it as part of ourselves. The second part, and again, I think this perhaps is more contextual to what we're talking about in terms of South Asian communities. Whenever I think of the word shame, I immediately associate it with the word honour. And so we all know within South Asian communities, we can't have, shame won't exist without honour. And honour only can actually thrive if the associated shame is a very true consequence of honour. Because honour is only upheld because if we don't uphold it, shame starts to exist in that same space. And so from a very kind of community and cultural perspective, honour is something that is held within a community, and everyone within your family or community can feel honour the moment an individual upholds those honour rules. And so everyone benefits from the positive reputation that comes from people in their family upholding the honour codes. Now, going back to this thing, to Hector again, you mentioned about shame feeling very isolating and very lonely. And it's because the moment an honour code or rule is broken, what immediately happens is rather than becoming a collective issue, it again gets split off, dissociated, dismissed. And rather than the mental health issue within an individual being split off, what happens is it's that whole individual gets split off from the community. So it's the same dissociated dynamic of that shame happening, but it happens on a community level rather than within the individual. So again, the two can compound one another. So an individual within a community who, by having a mental health issue, then is carrying the shame of the mental health issue, that happens kind of externally about the person and their relationship with everyone else in their community. They're being split off from them, and that individual holds the shame. Therefore, they're isolated. They are disconnected from the community. But something internal is also happening, which is their internal shame to their own mental health then is being split off and disconnected within them. So again, it has to happen on both community external level, and it has to happen on an internal sense of self level, which is to again embrace it, bring it back into the fold. And I think this brings us back full circle into, we have to think about mental health within or rather we have to think about good mental health as thriving within community. And I completely agree that community is not just about family or our neighbours or the geographical community that we live in. We're talking about good mental health thrives in community in which our holistic identity, every aspect of us, is accepted. Because shame thrives when parts of us are not accepted and we don't feel that we belong.
Could I just expand a little bit on that part that you mentioned about bringing it back to the individual? And this is coming from my personal practice and also the work with clients is, we're talking about faith, religion, spirituality here. And sometimes what really helps is just going back to those divine scriptures and really understanding what they're saying, because we like to talk about normalizing. And, that is what is happening in those scriptures, is that, they're telling us that this is a state that people all over the world are experiencing. So you are not the first to experience this, but then they're also offering the solutions to that. And, if we're not ready to connect to the scriptures, another way we use that is by stories like, we've been talking about, is by parables, is by, I'm sure that we all have it within our way of life where, there's somebody who was going through this experience, what we might now term a mental health issue. And these are the things that they understood based on the scriptures that were able to help them overcome it. So, really using that part, particularly with the elders in our community. Again, not so much looking at the shame and focusing on the shame, but focusing on this is normal in the sense that people since time began have experienced these issues. But what has our leaders, what have our messengers or our prophets or gurus, what have they told us about how we overcome this? Thank you.
Okay. Did anyone else want to expand on that, or should we go to the next question? It's fine if you do. Okay. So Raj GH from the Carers Health and Wellbeing Forum asks, how do we separate tackling mental health and support?
So I'd be I'm really curious about what sparks that question, because I don't think I've ever thought about separating faith and culture, because I think in a lot of ways they can't be, or if you do, then you could be losing a lot of really important nuance. And maybe if it's about trying to make it simpler or easier to tackle what the education is and what the support is, I still think that it's important to focus, but be able to see that faith and culture are really entwined in ways that are difficult to separate. So I know I didn't answer the question and just answered asked a question myself in response. But I think it is important to know that just, what Hinduism looks like in the United States is going to be really different from Hinduism in India or Nepal or, Myanmar or Sri Lanka. And the reasons for that really impact the stigma and the ways that people think about mental health in a lot of ways. And that's why it's really important to, as we're doing the work, to really be able to focus on the community around us, and understanding what it is that they're thinking, how they're thinking it, and what they need to overcome that, and to understand what is the education they need, what are the particular misconceptions they have, what is the support that's needed.
I also think this is an interesting question. This is something that I've kind of considered in my own work, working with various different communities across conditions. And I think my kind of gut answer would be, I don't think you can separate the two, because they are so intrinsically intertwined. People, you have faith, you have your religion, and you also have your culture. Culture is a huge part of you in terms of, particularly as we think about ourselves coming from various South Asian backgrounds, we've grown up with so much richness and culture, and these things have, these, I guess, facets of our life have underpinned kind of decisions that we've made. They underpin interpretations of experiences. And when it comes to religion, your culture also interprets the way that you it gives you a perception to view scriptures and understand scriptures. And so to completely separate the two is almost impossible, because culture isn't just our culture by heritage, it's the different cultures that we belong to. We talk about assimilation. I'm Indian by heritage, but I've grown up in the UK. There are definitely aspects of my personality that are very Indian, but there are also aspects of my personality that I've assimilated with the West. I bring both of those cultures to me when I look at my faith, and then how I then view certain situations before me. So in terms of when we're developing resources for specific communities, they need to be tailored. Each community, even in geographic location, but even across kind of denominations in different religions, they're all going to have different cultural nuances that then help to interpret scriptures and religion and faith, and all of those things will in combination then relate to how they interpret health and well-being. And so if we're talking about kind of developing resources and supporting these communities, then I think at the heart of everything we need to do, it needs to be co-creation. And this is something, particularly in the academic and scientific field, that's something that's been recognized, because we don't have all the answers. There are several limitations to all of us. And for a very long time, we have thought that, when we're developing research proposals and clinical guidelines, we've thought we know all the answers. But actually, what we're realizing is there's so much we don't know. And that comes from the fact that a lot of the stuff that we've done has been in isolation from the populations that really need the help. We talk about quantitative research, randomized controlled trials that have been done and generalizable to the population, but actually how generalizable are they? We've used random sampling, and we've said kind of we've stratified our populations and ensured we've got a huge reach that can represent the general population, but it's these nuances that are missed. And then when we formulate these guidelines and best practice, best evidence-based practice, we still have so many patients that can't benefit from the treatment options that we have. And so I think, to kind of just bring it back, we really need to think about what's wrong with our methods, what's wrong with the way that we're talking to these communities, and actually we don't give them a voice. We know that South Asian minority groups are unheard, they're underserved. they're not empowered to have an active role in their health and well-being, and actually we need to go back to them, and we need to make them feel like they are on board. And kind of what Myra touched on in the remembering the power dynamics, when you co-create, it's not, the power dynamic is balanced. It's very much that, you know, what are your needs and how can we help, because you are the expert, not us as the experts. I think that's probably the closest we'll come to trying to at least work with faith and culture. But yeah, I don't feel they can truly be separated. But yeah, it's just my 2 cents.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, Mara?
Yeah, can I just add to this?
Sure.
Yes, it's an interesting question in the sense that we cannot separate them. However, we do have to be really careful that in tackling, in talking about mental health, or even when we're talking about working cross-culturally, that we are able to distinguish between faith and culture. So they are two aspects of our identity that are constantly in relationship with one another, that are heavily influenced by one another. But at their core, they are two different things. And I think it's really important that when we are teaching, whether it's about working cross-culturally, whether it's working with a particular community, that we understand that both are going to be present, that we can understand what the faith is, that we can understand what the culture is, but to be able to acknowledge and understand that they have a relationship between them. And that relationship also coexists within somebody's wider sense of self and identity. We can't really talk about identity without then talking about intersectionality, that our lived experience is a holistic experience of our identity and how it is related to it and how we are positioned in the world because of our faith, our culture, and 20 other aspects, 20 plus more aspects of our identity. And so it's not about separating them, but it's about being really clear that when we're thinking about somebody's faith, how does that individual understand it? How does it sit with them? How do they relate to it? And how do they understand it? What's their culture? Second of all, what's their culture? Where and how has that culture been born and derived, and how has it evolved for them? How do they experience? And then thirdly, how do the two interact and relate to one another? Because very often over the years, I've worked with a huge number of clients for which they present something and go, well, I've been told that mental health is such and such, or if I get a divorce, it will be such and such, so something quite negative. And one of my kind of go-to questions is, well, where has that message come from? Has that come from your faith or from your culture? And very often what people mistake as something that is faith-based is actually cultural based. And I think we have to be really challenging. We have to be really mindful and challenging of where do people internalize that inner critical voice? Where are they internalizing these beliefs from? Where are these messages coming from? That whilst they might be coming from their faith community, it's being born out of a potential cultural dynamic. And we need to be able to know the distinction, or rather our clients need to really know and understand the distinction between the two. Because again, otherwise they are contextually living and understanding their faith through a cultural lens, which is what has just been mentioned, when we need to be really mindful that yes, they might understand something through a faith, something as a faith issue or something that their faith tells them. When you actually scratch away at the surface, oh, actually, it's come through my culture of the community that I've been born and brought up in. So we cannot separate them, but what we can do is recognize them as two distinct aspects of our internalized identity or our lived experience. And how do the two relate to one another, and how do we as an individual relate to both of them?
That's great. You've almost gone into the next question, Myra. So I'm just going to bring that up. It's actually a follow-up question. is from Karan Delakia. How do you approach this when the person in question has separated themselves from a particular faith? Does anyone want to lead on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think maybe it's part of being a psychologist where you see a question and then you think of 4 more questions you want to ask in response, right? Of, what in separating from culture, or sorry, from faith, what is still important to understand about how they're holding on to culture, if they are or aren't, really what do they need in that moment. I think I can't unfortunately remember who said it. Maybe it was Amandeep, but there's as many religions as there are people on this planet in so many ways, and how each person individually understands faith and culture and how they're intertwined and how they impact them are going to be really individual. But I think it's important to acknowledge that as much as faith can be a really, really powerful tool to find empowerment, to find resiliency, to find strength, to deal with mental illness, but with every other, trial and tribulation that life can throw at you. As with any tool, when used poorly, it can be oppressive and it can be hurtful, and people certainly can hold a lot of trauma around that. That's important for us all to recognize, I think, even as we're talking in a lot of ways about how faith has been overly stigmatized in the wrong way in certain ways. So, I have a lot of questions about what someone who's separated themselves from a faith needs, and if they can find a way to protect themselves while also seeing what faith or even culture or the community or whatever it may be have been able to do for them, right? I think so much of the work always is to understand, the things that we're doing. How are they working? How are they not working? Are we at a point where we need to change our strategies? So, yeah, I hope that just kind of answers the question.
Yeah.
Somebody else about to speak?
No, yeah, sure, you can add on.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add on. I think what's really interesting is that, again, I think there's something again about how the profession and the practice and the clinical practice gets positioned in relationship with the clients that we work with. And I think it goes back to something I said at the very start around the humanity, and the humanity gets lost. And it's really interesting that a lot of the questions are about, well, how it's positioning, how does the practitioner then help a community, or how do I do something? How do I approach? What is it that I need to do in order to help somebody in the community, a client or a service user or a patient, however you might want to describe them? And what I'm really struck by, I think this question, and it's not specifically this question, but I think what it illustrates or highlights is the place we can easily get to, which is, what is it that I need to do as a practitioner? Or what is it that I need to know? Or what is it that I need to be tooled up with in order to help somebody else? And I'm sitting here going, what it can feel at times, and I think it's kind of this false sense of helping. I think we can get pulled into losing the humanity of the client or the person that's coming for help or wanting to seek help, in that how we approach it is essentially to ask them. Ask them, how do they experience themselves? How do they experience what has been their journey? What has been their experience then of stepping away from a faith? Or for me, it's about, I want to ask them. It goes back to that question, what was just said a moment ago about we get asked a question and 4 more questions come up. For me, it's the questions are to the person. The questions are, I go straight into what I talk about. I mean, I teach, intersectionality. I talk about working cross-culturally. I teach working cross-culturally and how do we sit and build a relationship and be in relationship with another person? If we're having a client coming to us who has separated themselves from a particular faith, my question is to ask, what was that like for you? What was your experience? How did you experience that? I don't have a toolkit. I don't have a go-to question or a go-to approach of how I'm going to treat this person, because the moment I do that, I have lost my cultural humility and I have lost my cultural curiosity. And there's something around, again, as I said earlier, we are not the experts. The person is an expert in their own lived experience. And for me, it's always about what I try to put as fundamental and as the most important aspect of the work we do is the relationship we have with our clients and with the people that we support. If somebody's coming to me and talking about that there has been a shift in their internal identity, a shift in their relationship with their faith, because that's essentially what this question is speaking to, well, tell me, share with me, what has that experience been like? Let's not forget, let's not lose the sense of the person that's in front of us. I think that's so important. I do so much work around this topic in how do we get therapists and psychologists and counsellors to be able to work cross-culturally or across different faith groups or different diverse communities, whether that's a faith community, an ethnic community, across various aspects of our identity, LGBTQ, different sexualities, different genders. I always go back to the relationship. I always go back to that person is right there in front of you. Ask them and be curious about them and be curious about their experience. So how do you approach this person? Is to ask them.
I love that, Myra, because I think I live by that sort of statement, which is the power of not knowing. I don't know many things, and the only way I'll find out is if I ask you. And that's quite powerful in so many ways, and it liberates us from our position of putting ourselves in this place of knowing, because we don't know everything, and that's okay. We have to learn to become a bit more comfortable with that.
Okay.
But the next question, Kino?
Okay. So I'm just mindful of the time. So this may be the last question, unless you're all happy to continue for a little bit longer. I'll just pull the question up. So this is from CT. What advice does the panel have for persons with gendered privileges on being better allies in addressing gender discrimination within the realm of mental health in the South Asian diaspora? Ekta, I feel you have something to share for this one.
I think for me, it goes back to whether they are with me in terms of a client or they are just a person that I'm interacting with, because that's not clear in the question. But if it is a person that is coming to me as a client and they are talking about a relationship that they have, how they are placed in the community, and it has happened to me in the past where I have asked them, I said, are you willing to hear another side of the story? Are you here for me to validate you, or are you here to actually make a difference? And sometimes people have said that they want to make a difference. They're not just here to vent. And I have invited other people in their lives to either write a letter to them or invited them to be part of a session. And again, I use personal experiences, and I don't like to get into very data and research. And I just want to, I ask them, how do you want this other person to feel when they are in relationship with you? How do you want them to feel? How do you want to feel as being their partner, as being their father, as being their brother? And most often that empowers them. And they're like, I want them to be comfortable with me. I want them to be safe with me. And then we talk about what are some of the ways in which they can experience that, right? And then again, it has always helped to invite, ask them if they are willing to invite or have these conversations inside at home. These are very challenging conversations. Many times people say yes, they want to have these conversations, but they are not ready to really make any substantial changes, because it comes with sharing responsibility. It comes with um, taking on some more responsibility, and a person may not always be ready. But I still think that the fact that they are there, it's going to be an expansive conversation, eventually taking them towards where they want to go. I have to be, and I will talk about myself as a clinician, of a trigger for me when people start being very patriarchal or homophobic or whatever in therapeutic sessions. So I seek supervision, because these are extremely challenging situations when people go into these type of narratives. And usually I find that seeking the support of like-minded clinicians, my supervisor, allows me to be present for the person where they are, because that is my role. Beyond just listening to them, I spiritually, I am there in their life, and I have a particular role as well. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not just there as a clinician, I'm there as a spiritual conduit in that sense, and I have to take care of myself while I fulfill that role myself.
So for me, again, I would, if we're talking about this in the context of faith and spirituality, is to then guide them back to what they understand their divine scriptures to be saying, because I think we would all agree that our scriptures do not encourage discrimination of any kind. So for me, as long as they're open to that, it's constantly, like you said, you're being that spiritual conduit, but in a way, we're also being that guide as well, in whatever way we can, to just say, well, what is your understanding of God, of the universe, of, what is the difference between you and another person, and really kind of reflecting on that. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to hop off right at for my time, but I really appreciated everyone else's reflections, and just think that as an individual more than as a clinician, being an ally has meant knowing that something is uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong, and doing a lot of work to grapple with reactions that come up, and not putting that work on anyone else, and that growth. And I hope it's helpful to remember that it's meant a lot to me to watch my dad actually grow as an ally, coming from a place of being holding a lot of misconceptions and stigma, and more than anything, going on visceral reactions. But having conversations about that has been important. Yeah. But I just wanted to take a second to say thank you for this opportunity, and to hear from every other amazing panelist. I wish I had a little bit more time, but clinical responsibilities, right? And yeah, just thank you guys again.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Take care, guys.
Take care. I'll just ask now, do any of you have to hop off now as well, or do you want to take another question?
I don't need to hop off, but can I just add in my answer to the question, because I think everyone has kind of answered so eloquently. and it's interesting because my head went to a completely different place with the question, interestingly. And very often when people are looking to become an ally, and I think it's a beautiful intention, again, for me, it's about, so where does the focus go? And what I mean by that is, so essentially my advice would be for CT, if this is you asking the question for yourself, my advice actually is I've got some questions that I would like you then to ask of yourself, because when we ever have an aspect of our identity that is privileged, we can get so caught up in looking at the oppressed end of the spectrum with that aspect of our identity and go, well, how can I help the other? That we actually can, again, we can dismiss and we can minimize what how and where our privilege can actually help us to be a better ally. So specifically in relation to kind of gendered privileges, my question then to the allies would be, for you really to, first of all, before you even start helping an ally, is to look at your own privilege first. And it is to identify, well, what does your privilege give you? So what does my privilege give me? What does it allow me to do? What does it allow me to experience? Because the moment you actually understand how your privilege benefits you, only then can you start to identify how and where the other genders are actually being oppressed and how they're being oppressed. It's not good enough just to say that males and men are privileged. It's about asking the question, well, in what way? Because the moment you can identify the ways in which you are privileged, you can only then start to empathize with women and people with gender fluidity or non-binary, people that don't identify as a cis male. Only then can you understand in what ways they are then being oppressed by their identity. So my first question would be, what does my privilege give me? What does it allow me to do? Second of all, only then can you ask yourself, how can I, or where can I use my privilege to then be an ally? Because I think so often what happens is, and this is exactly the benefit of privilege, which is by having privilege, I then, in trying to be an ally, I actually reenact my oppression, my oppressiveness, my own supremacy, my own privilege. So we have to actually acknowledge that by the very fact that you hold privilege, you have to be so careful then that you're using it in order to create space for as an ally, and to create space for the oppressed aspects of those communities or those identities, rather than using your privilege to actually speak on behalf of or speak instead of. And that's your privilege then in action. So my advice would be the questions to ask of yourself, rather than focusing first of all anyway on the people that are being oppressed, because actually it's your own identity that's oppressing them.
And just to add a last question to what Myra was saying, so Myra gave a set of questions to ask. I would also ask, what are you doing well? What do you need to do better? Simple, like it tells you where that person is, and it also makes them think. And again, how a person may be behaving. How do you behave at a macro level? How do you behave in an intermediate level? How do you behave at home? And allow them to examine. And I always, like, part of my training was that we did our own assessment, and for fun we asked 5 other people how we were doing on each of these. So if they're genuinely looking to expand their horizons, I would ask them to ask the same questions to 5 other people in their lives, just as a game, just to see. And most of the times I have not used it for the gender privileged ones, but I have used it for things like emotional maturity. And I think it would still work. And it might be a great piece of conversation to sit with, what opened up for you, what came up for you, what was a surprise, what went according to your expectations. So it's just like, I love the idea of being inviting in that way, and help them to explore what they think is going on and what others think is going on as far as they're concerned.
I can't wait to do that myself, actually, and ask 5 people those questions. So we have one more from Dr. Janshare B. We may have already touched on this previously slightly, but are there any particular religious perspectives, attitudes, or approaches which therapists could utilize to help clients shift to a more favorable perspective to overcome physical health challenges?
I would say for me, I live with chronic illnesses. Like I talked about, being my mom had young onset dementia. It is a genetic thing. In the next few years, I haven't done the genetic test, but it's very pervasive in my family. I live at risk for this condition. I would say that the perspective of suffering and it being a part of our lives, and living with equanimity, focusing on impermanence. So the Buddhist path has been very, very useful to me. And if you see in the Western psychotherapeutic, they use mindfulness-based stress reduction, they use mindfulness-based self-compassion, they used one more, something to do with resilience. I'm forgetting. Oh, there is dialectical behavioral therapy, there's acceptance and commitment therapy. All of these have roots in Buddhism. I would say that it is an incredible practice, incredibly rich perspective. Having said that, there is perspectives in Christianity and Islam about death and about dying, and of course in Hinduism as well. So I would say that based on where the person is at, I might share what I know. A book that I would recommend, and that I'm currently reading, is How to Be Sick. It talks about a person who is living with many, many chronic conditions and has debilitating, like cannot even move. And those are some of the resources that I am personally using in my life as I deal with the reality of being sick over the next few years. I live with debilitating chronic pain. And I have to say that, so if you have seen me shifting today in my chair, it comes from being, not being able to sit comfortably, no matter how good the chair is. So I would say that's a perspective that has helped me tremendously. So that's where I'm coming from. I will let the others share their own perspectives.
So for me, this is a subject also close to my heart as well. As someone who has, again, experienced a lot of physical health challenges, and that's what brought me on this journey to be sitting where I am right now. And then also from the Sikhi side of things, that spiritual perspective. So, I agree. It's about meeting the person where there is, but something that I can share for myself personally was really understanding that mind body connection. So you might be familiar with the work of people like Louise Haye, and it's something that was life changing for me, and that's something that I find in our divine scriptures as well. Is understanding the role of repressed emotions, how just like we get butterflies in our tummy, we could be excited, we could be anxious, and understanding in terms of energy as well. When we don't release that emotional energy, what happens to that energy when it becomes stuck in the body. So it's going beyond just kind of thoughts, and again, coming back to this idea of holistic, it's not just about the mind, which is separate from the body, which is your heart is separate from your liver. I was getting sent from gastro to gynae to all sorts of different ways, and just got to that end point. And for me, the answer was right there. The answer laid within the scriptures, laid within the universal truth that we're all sharing here today, which is it's not actually any different. It comes, for me, it comes back down to that sense of knowing who I truly am, living in that truth, but what I've, and that's what the journey is about. So, learning how to deal with the mind as well, the emotions as well, and how that has an impact on our physical health. Just for example, that if you've got a tummy ache and then you stress up your muscles, it's going to hurt more. And from that mindfulness perspective, you've got the issue of the physical health, but then you add in the pillow of what are you thinking about your physical health, and what are your responsibilities? How is it impacting that? And it becomes even more painful and even more burdensome. So yeah, I'm probably rambling because I get really passionate about this subject. But for me, you know, it's coming back to, you know, what does it mean? And yeah, I've just lost my words because there's so many thoughts coming into my mind. But just understanding that for me, the mind is the key. So it can be the lock and it can be the key. So it depends how we use it. And often it's how we feel about something will definitely change how we react to it, because our body is that equipment that's going to respond to whatever's going on internally. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
I was just going to add that some of the things that I've seen when working with specific patient groups, and this is from a range of different faiths, is the concept of surrender. Kind of talking about when we think about surrender, I've been in rooms where certain healthcare professionals will think of it, it's quite a passive act, but actually it's an empowering act, because what it causes the individual to think about is there are certain things that I can take control of in my life, but there are equally certain things in the here and now that are just beyond my control. And actually the simple act of just surrendering and giving up what you cannot control or what you cannot help to happen is so powerful, because then it makes the patient or the individual feel like, okay, here is what I can take control of. This is what I can do. These are things that I can put into place. So then we can start introducing goal setting. You know, we can set tasks and just simple goals that patients and individuals start to achieve is so much more impactful than just sitting feeling helpless and not knowing what to do. And so surrender is something that's kind of across all religions, and it's the act of just, I mean, you don't even have to surrender to God, as we've already talked about. It could be whatever your higher power is. You know, when we look at things like the 12 steps, surrender is such a huge part of that. It's such a key part of it, and that's probably one of the most favourable perspectives that I would recommend, or at least consider exploring, because it places that power back in the individual's hand, and that's so important, particularly when we start to look at, you know, how you can start to shift mentalities within clients, and also just general locus of control. It's restoring that control back to the client. And yeah, I'm just gonna stop there too.
I just wanted to add to this. It's interesting because in the question asking about how to help clients shift to a more favourable perspective, what that actually indicates is that clients then are already looking at their physical health challenges already from a particular perspective. And so I'm immediately thinking, well, the first step is, how are they currently, what's their current perspective on their physical health challenges, and what is the lens through which they're gaining that perspective? And what I mean by that is the lens then a worldly lens? Is it a lens that only allows them to see the here and now, or seeing their life as their life in the current place where they are right now on earth, and through that worldly lens? To then think about, to actually shift to a religious or faith or spiritual perspective, attitude or belief or lens, is to immediately shift to a wider perspective of something bigger than, higher than, greater than this world. And so I think recognizing, first of all, what is the lens through which the client is currently understanding, interpreting their current physical health challenges is really important to establish for the first step. Because actually, how we interpret our this particular or any physical health challenge, I think, is then going to lend itself and lead to consequences of how the person then feels about it and relates to those health challenges. So examples might be, if people are well, I suppose if we shift it, moving away from a worldly lens to a faith lens, or a spiritual lens, we can immediately start to look at physical health challenges through the lens of the challenges I'm facing in this world. They are a way of expiating, removing my sins, first of all. It can be a test from God, and I'm being tested in my patience, or I am being tested not in my faith, but I am being tested, or I am being offered opportunity to return back to, it's the surrender piece we just spoke about, to return back to God, to reconnect with God. It's that it is not the physical health challenges in and of themselves, but rather, what is the experience offering me up to then do on a higher power, on that higher level, through that lens of that non-worldly lens of, what is this shifting or asking me to shift within myself to be able to either put more faith in God, or it turns me back to scriptures or to holy books, or does it allow me to reconnect to my faith? And so it can be experienced as things like, it's a test, I'm being tested, or I'm being tested with patience, or that I can surrender to it, or that it's a removal of sins, or that in a even more positive way, you can see it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to really foster and invest in my faith and in my relationship with God. And finally, the moment we see it through that non-worldly lens, we immediately understand it as, this body is only temporary, that the physical challenges that I'm experiencing are only for this world, but my soul lives on. My soul, there's I appreciate that each different faith is going to position and understand life after death in a different potentially in a different way, in how they understand what happens to the soul after we leave this world. But to recognize that the body, though, doesn't go with us. And so it's about being able to really holistically approach how we relate between mind, body, and soul. The second part to this then is again, if we understand it through a religious perspective, it's to recognize then that if our soul lives on for eternity, then what our soul has done, it has found a home, a physical home in this world. And so the body then becomes a manifestation of, again, something that is bestowed upon us, something that we are blessed with looking after in this world, because it's been the home for our soul in this lifetime, in this life on earth. And it's interesting, because what the image that comes to my mind then is a crab in a shell, or any kind of sea creature that finds a home, finds a shell as its home, and temporarily lives in that shell. And in a way, what it's actually, if we're able to look at any physical health challenge through any of these faith and spiritual perspectives, what it ultimately brings us to is gratitude. It brings us to a place of feeling grateful for being bestowed a home to have in this world, no matter what state it is in. That if we can always see it as coming from a place of gratitude, then we can honor what our body is able to do, but equally we're actually able to honor in what it can't do. We are able to honor them what it is within it we have been blessed with.
Well, I think we're all grateful that we're able to come together and hear all of you speak today. That was the last question to have come in, but we have one more that Ekta and Amandeep have already kind of answered. So if anyone watching right now wanted to know even more about everything that you spoke about today, then are there any other like books that you might recommend, or any texts, any audiobooks, anything?
I'd recommend this one. It's always at my desk. I don't know if you can see it, but it's Spiritually Integrated Psychotherapy by Ken Pargement. Ken is a retired professor at Bowling Green in the US, but this book's very, very eloquent about how to begin to address religion and spirituality and issues pertaining to religion and spirituality within a clinical setting. It's got a lot of, it's quite a thick book, but I would recommend reading it from cover to cover. He draws on kind of examples of clients that he's worked with, and just provides different ways to kind of start to address the sacred in a context and in a safe environment, in a safe way, without challenging the individual. And kind of related to it, he's developed a lot of resources with him and his team around how to help clinicians have the competencies to actually start to integrate religion and spirituality into their practice. So that's probably my go-to book. I think somebody's put Ken who, so it's Ken Pargement.
Oh, sorry. What's his surname?
Pargement. So Pargament.
It's Spiritually Integrated Psychotherapy.
Yeah.
I would probably say, the source of all wisdom is going to be in our authentic scriptures, whatever path we're following. So, as Iqta, said earlier, it's our job to be that conduit. So the deeper our connection is with that source, whatever we believe to be, that is going to make all of that difference to how we are able to serve. So that for me is the ultimate answer, in terms of, I know it's not book necessarily, but in terms of accessing that wisdom for ourselves so we can understand that. And, that will feed into how we hold that space, how we have compassion, how we can be non-judgmental and empathetic and all of that, and see all of the creation as part of that one creation. So that's it. Thank you.
So I would say that a lot of psychotherapies are coming from the Buddhist perspective. I am not going to name them because I find them very stripped of the culture and the ethics. So you know what they are. Anything you've probably touched has a tinge of that. But what I will say is, for your use, books by Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Children especially, everything is so simple. The books are small. They're all available as audio talks. And she laughs at herself. And I really enjoy that, very humanely talking about how to get on the path. I have used these books extensively. But if you want to learn how to teach clients self-compassion and compassion, there is a course by C. Cares in Stanford, and it's called Compassion Cultivation, CCT, Compassion Cultivation Training. The developer is the Dalai Lama's chief translator, and Thupten Jinpa. I have adopted him as my spiritual teacher. He doesn't know I exist, but he's someone that I follow. And it's such a great evidence-based plus completely culturally rooted training program. The training is very expensive, but the attending the training is very easy. He shares the tools very freely, and so I would recommend that program as well. So if you get a chance, and if you can't go to a training, the book is called A Fearless Heart, where he describes some of the meditations and the concepts, and it's an incredible book to have because it's so easy to read. It's suitable for people of all perspectives, from all walks of life, and it's something that even we can just flip through, be like, oh, on gratitude, oh, on this, and it's, you will get a lot of tools of how to sit with things, how to teach clients to sit with things.
And that's by Thupten Jinpa, is that correct?
I was just going to add that specifically for Islamically integrated counselling or psychotherapy, there are a couple of books. There's been a real resurgence actually in Islamic counselling over the last few years. So there are a few books that have recently been published. So they're easily to find to Google on various well-known bookstores. Islamically integrated psychotherapy or Islamic counselling. But what's really interesting, and I suppose the distinction I really want to make, is that when we think about specific approaches in that respect, they are modalities in my mind. When we think about Western modalities, what we absolutely have alongside that are all of these Eastern modalities that we're talking about. So very often what happens is that practitioners, they learn in a Western modality, they train in a core Western modality, and then they want to go on and develop a faith-based practice. Now, I kind of want to make the distinction that just because we might have a faith does not make us a faith-based therapist. They are two different things. There is a difference between being a Muslim counsellor and offering Islamic counselling, as an example. So for me, my question to anybody listening, to people that go, I want to develop my faith-based work, it is to recognise, do you want to have faith integrated into the work you're currently doing, and it to be a part of your approach within the other modalities that you use? Or is it, no, I want to go and train in that faith-based practice as the modality in and of itself? And I think we have to be really clear, intentional, and transparent, and actually honest with ourselves about the path we're choosing. One is not right or wrong. One isn't better than the other. I just think we have to be so mindful that, I think, again, when we come again in thinking about, the fact we're all coming here through that commonality, that thread of South Asian communities, that actually we don't want to be doing a disservice to our communities by saying, just because I have a faith means that I'm then an expert in, for me then I wear hijab, I'm visibly Muslim, does not make me then automatically an expert in delivering Islamic counselling. I have gone and done training in Islamic counselling, and I think that goes for anybody from any particular ethnic background and anyone that has a particular faith. So I kind of just really want to make that point that for all of us, we are trained to offer the modalities we are trained with. We all have lived experience and our own faith to be able to have dialogue about those faiths within our practice. It doesn't automatically make us an expert in that modality. And if we want to go and get the training and deliver that particular modality, then please do go get the training. They are out there. Having said that, though, of course, then there are lots of books and resources out there for all the modalities that we will all be coming from on this panel. And it's about which ones are you drawn to? Which ones do I want to learn or know about? Do I want to go and learn about spiritual or faith-based, because that's what's close to me? So again, it's very easy to find the books. As I said, there's Islamically integrated psychotherapy books out there. There's Islamic counselling books out there. But they are absolutely talking to you about a modality of counselling, not a case of how do I just shoehorn it into my psychodynamic or humanistic. It's at the very heart and centre of the work you're going to be doing with your client. There was, of course, another point I wanted to make, and now I've forgotten it. If I remember really quickly, that was it. 2 points actually. One is I'm now going to shoehorn something in and say that for anybody that wants to then attend workshops, I do deliver workshops on working with culture, faith, ethnicity and race, online workshops. I also deliver workshops on understanding and working with power and privilege and intersectionality, because for me those are two huge topics that we need to know about when working with clients or anybody in any kind of helping profession. The final point I want to make, and it goes back actually to a point that Amandeep you just made a moment ago. We can only offer spaces and we can only go as far on a journey with a client we can only go as far, and we can only go as deep with a client as far and as deep we have gone with ourselves. The ultimate thing we need to do is to know ourselves. And so when we think about, and I get that we might get pulled towards what books, what resources, what do I need to learn? Again, how do I build my toolkit? How do I build my resources or my library? Your biggest resource, your biggest tool, your biggest reference point is yourself. The biggest, the most helpful thing any one of us can do is actually building our own level of self-awareness, because we cannot offer a space, we cannot help anybody, whether you're a therapist or not, to be in any helping profession, to be any caring profession. The moment we are offering space to another, to somebody else's story, somebody else's journey and lived experience, we cannot offer that ethically, we cannot offer that holistically, or in a caring, empathic, culturally competent or culturally humble way, if we haven't been able to do that for ourselves first. So for me, the biggest thing, the biggest piece of advice then would be to learn about yourself, know yourself.
That's definitely a good point to end on. Did anyone want to add anything to the conversation?
Yeah, please feel free to connect with each. I speak. I'm sorry if I speak for everyone. I don't know where everyone is, but yeah, please stay connected. If any of our work was interesting to you, you want to learn more. I know I'm going to hit up some of these people and be in their workshops, because I have truly enjoyed being part of this panel. Tina and Keenal, thank you so much for having me. Everyone else, thank you so much. This was so enriching and empowering. My heart is full just to be here and to hear everyone speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's a big part of what we're all about as well. So Brand Therapist Network is about all of you connecting with each other. So if anyone watching as well, there's a few therapists that have been watching. If you want to sign up, then our link is just in the chat window. And if you want to find out more about any of our panelists, their websites are in the chat function, and we'll link all of you in the description when we upload this stream onto YouTube.
Thank you, everyone, for being part of this. Big thank you to the panelists, each and every one of you. Your wisdom, your words, your insights, your thoughts have been totally invaluable. Thank you, Keenal, for setting this up. It's been an absolute amazing event. So round of applause to Keenal for setting this up. And thank you to the guests who have commented and joined in. For those of you who are watching at home, thank you so much. Without your contributions, without your conversations, we wouldn't be having these in-depth conversations. So please do watch this space for more events in the future. Please do subscribe to our newsletter to find out first when we'll be holding our next event. And thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your day or good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.